Hello ladies and gentlemen, Kaz'tik here. This is the Heroic Healer Guide for Paragons of the Klaxxi. And as usual, this video should assist healers with everything that you'll need to know to get through this fight on Heroic. So, to begin, we'll just go through each of the bosses in order, and starting off with Bloodseeker. So, the raid will initially attack Rikkal for a little bit, but then switch and kill Bloodseeker first. Now, the important thing to note is that if you are converted to a scorpion, you need to eat at least one parasite that's active, which is something your tank is in charge of. If you do not eat a parasite, you will die when the scorpion fades. You can sometimes eat two if your raid can afford two of them to be eaten, but otherwise at least just eat one of them if you get converted to a scorpion. Generally, there are a lot of abilities to avoid here. Some of them you'll be used to from normal, so avoid the rapid-fire bolts. If you have a CC, help CC the parasites. You can use roots and all forms of CC and stun all work on them. And as a healer, some important notes are to not be afraid to spam heals during this part. This opening kill, the first boss or two, probably the most dangerous because of the parasites. One of the most dangerous parts of the fight, and where a lot of your spam heals will come in. So don't be afraid to use a lot of your mana during this first part. In particular, players that are scorpions will take a lot of damage. The players that are being fed on by the parasites, if they're not CC'd, will take a lot of damage. And of course, for aim soaking, you need to make sure people are topped off before the aim actually hits. Depending on your strategy, as a healer, you may be part of the aim team. So if there are 4 or more players soaking the aim, you do not need a cooldown. If you're full health, you'll be fine, as long as you're not overlapping. But if there are only 3 players, so if that is like part of the aim team is targeted with the aim, use a personal cooldown for that aim hit so that you can survive the damage. Because split 3 ways or less, it's quite a bit. For the second boss of Rikkal the Dissector, still have the majority of the abilities you were dealing with before. The new ones are from Kara's the Locust. So you need to watch for the Hurl Amber, which is targeting ranged members randomly. You can see where those bolts are going to land if you just watch for the little explosion on the ground. But the best thing to do is if he's casting that ability, simply start running away in one direction, away from other people, and you'll avoid the bolts. Or not the bolts, but the bombs. The other thing is his Whirl Charge. Again, this is a normal ability. Just sidestep it if it comes toward you, and you should be able to avoid it. Everything else about this phase is pretty much the same as you've been dealing with, however. So just keep healing through that parasite damage. Your raid, while they're killing Dissector, will still have a couple parasites left. But once the second boss is dead, then your raid can kill off the parasites, and the damage is lowered significantly. The third target is Korven the Prime. And in order to kill him without dealing with his heal ability, the way it's sort of meant to, the raid will use kind of a trick, which doesn't really matter for healers, but basically allow you to kill Korven as a third target as soon as he comes down. Meanwhile, there'll be parasites that will probably still be active, maybe 1 or 2. The raid should kill those off, but be aware that you'll have to heal through that extra damage for a little bit. The main thing during this phase, though, is Korven the Prime's very high damage output on tanks. If your tanks are positioned properly, only one of them should be hit by Korven at any given time. But his Vicious Assault does a lot of damage. So your tanks will need to swap Korven's target about halfway through the Vicious Assault. But as a healer, you need to spam single target heals on the tank that's currently tanking Korven and be ready to swap between the two. It may even be worth splitting your healing assignments. So one of you is on one tank, one of you is on the other. But generally we found just both of us on the same tank, whichever happens to be taking damage was the best. Next up you have Hisek Swarmkeeper, who has been in the center this whole time, so the raid can finally move to the middle. As a healer, just like you're ranged, you'll want to spread out so that you can easily avoid his bolts. When he does fire rapid fire bolts, don't be afraid to use or to move very far away so that you get a little bit wider gap with which to fit through. Getting hit by one of these bolts, plus other miscellaneous damage, will kill you. So it's really important you avoid that. Other than that, as a healer, along with the rest of the raid, you're avoiding all the major abilities that have been used up to this point, as well as the new ability from Iyyokok, which is Fiery Edge. If you have Fiery Edge on you, try to stay at least 15 yards away from any nearby player that also has Fiery Edge attached to you. The further away you are from another Fiery Edge target that's linked to you, the less damage the both of you will take. Meanwhile, don't be afraid to use your heal cooldowns for Fiery Edge, especially when it occurs during other unavoidable damage abilities. The next target of Xaril the Poisoned Mind is one of the more dangerous for the entire raid because of his catalytic reaction abilities. There are 3 different random colors that he'll use, so you don't really know the order that they'll be in. And I've listed the exact details there. You can always check out the full raid guide for more details if you want. But the basic idea is when he uses one of these colors, you'll want to run far away from the rest of the raid members and toward one of the walls around the outside of the room. All of these abilities are basically some form of ground effect. So there's a green puddle that moves around, an orange circle that emanates out from you, and purple fire that's on the ground. So just stay spread out. If you get the purple fire, face away from everyone else toward the walls, because it will auto-run you. And again, don't be afraid to use heal cooldowns during this period. Next up, you have Kaz'tik the Manipulator, who's another one of the very dangerous mobs for the raid. There's not a lot of damage to actually heal here, but as a ranged player, as a healer, you'll need to watch for the same mechanics the rest of the raid will, which is generally the Kuchongs that spawn around the room. So mechanically, you'll be used to this from normal difficulty, but you want to be very certain not to get too close to a Kuchong, or it will eat you, like it did our shaman there a moment ago. So once all 3 of them are spawned, try to move into a position that's far away from all 3 of the Kuchongs if possible. If one mesmerizes a player, he'll suck them toward that player. And you just don't want to use any movement boost abilities if possible, which you probably won't. But otherwise, there's really nothing extra significant to heal on this phase. There is some extra miscellaneous damage from Manipulator, which is the form of the sonic projectile that he fires at random raid members. So again, just like the rest of this fight pretty much, if you have your raid members spread apart from one another, they should only hit 1 or 2 players at most, and that'll mitigate some of the damage. And then the third to last target is Kil'ruk the Wind-Reaver, and this guy is without a doubt the most dangerous for tanks. He dual wields, he does a lot of burst damage, so if your tank doesn't have constant active mitigation abilities going, they will take a lot of damage. So just be aware of that. Just don't be afraid to spam heals on the tanks at this time. The other tank will be tanking both the existing mobs as well, so they can take quite a bit of spike damage as well. So just be aware of both these things, and there's really not, any tricks to dealing with the damage. It's mostly up to your tanks to use their own cooldowns when necessary. Meanwhile, the Reave ability where he sucks players in, you just want to run away from him and use any instant cast heals you might have that you can do while you're running away. If you cast from death from above and it's coming toward you, make sure you start moving immediately. You can avoid that ability, but if you stay stationary and it hits you, it may kill you. So once the Wind-Reaver is dead, you are down to the cleanup of this fight, and you only have 2 mobs left. You've been dealing with these abilities throughout the fight up to this point for a long time, so there's really nothing to add here. So just continue dealing with the Fiery Edge damage. Don't be afraid to use cooldowns for that, because the stack count on the bosses and therefore their damage output will be quite high at this point. But that's pretty much it. It's all downhill from here. And yeah, so that is the Heroic Healer Guide for Paragons of the Klaxxi. Overall, not too difficult to heal. This fight can be single healed, in fact. I wouldn't recommend it when you're learning this fight, but we've had a few attempts where one of our healers has been unresable quite early in the fight, and it's been healed, by one player from then on. In fact, we had one kill where both of our healers died, and the last couple bosses were healed by a DPS player that had healing output, our balanced druid. So anyway, there's not a lot of damage. It's just particular sections are quite bursty, but probably the most difficult aspect to heal is the very beginning, which is good because you'll get a lot of attempts at that right away. So while those parasites are active, don't be afraid to use as much of your healing output as you can. Even if you spend most of your mana, you'll have times to regenerate later in the fight. So anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.